Welcome everyone to this special edition of Summing Up, where we are previewing the upcoming budget. Last October, Rachel Reeves stood up in the Houses of Parliament and told us that the tax increases that were being implemented were a one-off and weren't to be repeated. It now appears very clear that that was not the case, and we're going to see a budget coming up on November the 26th where taxes are going to be raised again, are going to impact businesses, individuals and many of us. And we need to understand where these are going to hit, who should be preparing in advance and what we need to be thinking about. Economically, the word doom loop seems to be in the media a lot at the moment. And I think this is because we are seeing a government that has an inability to cut public spending, are being challenged relentlessly with increased inflation and high borrowing costs and very low growth. And so it seems like the only balancing act that can be done here is increase taxes, tax rises for many of us. Here at Lovell Blake, we always stay ahead of the curve, and we need to understand what may be coming up and what needs to be done in advance in order to cope with these tax increases and understand how to deal with them. I'm delighted to therefore be joined by Sophie Spaul, one of our senior managers who specialises in tax. We're going to talk today about, firstly, I think some of those policies that came out of last year's budget and how they've gone down. Some announcements last October still haven't been implemented, so I'd like to talk to you about how we think they will be, whether they may be tweaked or changed, and the potential impact of those policies. And then we'll move on to some potential predictions and nice to see policies that we think might be useful and we might see coming up in the budget on November the 26th. So to start off with, let's just have a chat about the policies that have already been implemented. And I think there's sort of three main ones. The first one, which has affected a lot of my clients, is around the employer's national insurance increase, which came in April, and I think has had quite the impact on the jobs market and businesses in general, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it has. I think one of the things that the headline arrived, and it employers' national insurance going up from 13.8% to 15%. And you might think, well, that's only a 1.2% increase. What's all the fuss about? But when you actually crunch the numbers, I mean, for instance, if you were to take an employer who had 10 members of staff on the national living wage, their actual increase, when you look at the increase in national insurance and also the threshold was reduced at when you start paying that in national insurance, the actual increase is 15%, not 1.2%. So you can then sort of see that translating across. I was just having a look before we started today at the Office for National Statistics for their job vacancies, and you see a reduction of 14% in that time between October 24 and the end of last month.
I think that was the point that a lot of people missed, was that reduction in the entry threshold, wasn't it? Which means that quite a lot of part-time workers, maybe students that need that experience over the summer months and were probably not earning enough over the course of a year to actually cost the business any national insurance. Suddenly, they are into the mix. They're earning over £5,000 a year, and national insurance is due by the employer at 15%. And I think those statistics are quite stark, but also I think it probably flags up that people at the lower level of the earnings pyramid and also those younger individuals are probably suffering more, and something which maybe we've not seen the full exposure to across our client base, but is interesting, if not worrying.
Absolutely.
One of the other points I think we saw was changes to the rates of capital gains tax and some of the rules, thresholds around that. What was implemented and when did that come in, and how have you seen that sort of apply to the businesses that you're advising?
So the capital gains tax for the basic rate taxpayer went up from 10% to 18%, and for the higher rate taxpayer from 20% to 24%. That was budget day. So straight away, no chance for anyone to do any quick avoidance or anything. It just in straight away. But when you actually look at what that has done to the tax take for capital gains tax, it's changed behaviour. And we've actually seen a reduction, if we compare 23-24 year, of £1 billion in capital gains tax receipts for the government compared to the 24-25 year.
So overall receipts have fallen?
Yes, because of the increase in the rates.
I think that's often, sorry, Sophie, I think that's often a criticism, isn't it? That not just this government, but politicians in the past don't or can't predict the behavioural change when tax rates are tweaked, changed, increased, and thresholds follow suit, is that people will choose not to sell their business, or will sit on their hands for a period of time, or do something slightly different. And it's worrying that actually the tax rates go up and people are choosing not to do these things, and actually tax has fallen. And you could see it happening again on some of the policies we'll come over to shortly.
Yes, and I think that increasing capital gains tax, I mean, they might do it, but it looks like it wouldn't make sense to do it. HMRC's own figures predict that if the capital gains tax rate went up 5%, then they would see £1 billion less coming in over 3 years. If it went up 10%, we'd see less £6 billion coming in.
Wow, really?
Over 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. And the other change, I think, in rates was with regard to business asset disposal relief, formerly entrepreneurs relief, where people selling their businesses, the first £1 million was taxed at 10%, jumped to 14%, and goes up to 18% next April, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And certainly some of the businesses we're working alongside at the moment are keen to sell their companies before April the 5th next year, and some of them, with half an eye on what may be announced in the budget, are kind of looking to crystallise that disposal pre-budget day as well, just in case there's an acceleration of that change. So if you are looking to sell a business, certainly have a think about accelerating that before the 5th of April next year, I think would be a sensible move to save on some tax.
Yeah, I was going to say on that point, I mean, when the allowance or for business asset disposal relief or entrepreneurs relief, as it was back then, was £10 million. The capital gains tax saving was $1.5 million per person. Now we're looking at it, when we get past April, the difference between 18% and 24% on £1 million. We're looking at £60,000 of tax difference. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And again, that comes back to behaviours, doesn't it? And it's understandable why people will just change what they're thinking of doing when it comes to these matters. And with that in mind, another area where a policy's already been enacted is around tax on non-doms. And we have certainly seen here at Lovell Blake a number of both British residents and overseas nationals have left the UK purely for tax reasons, haven't we? So that is playing out in the real world out there.
Yes, and anecdotally, my colleague Sadie Nichols, who deals with a lot of the international project work for us, has seen a lot more work than she would normally do, I think.
Yeah. Even I, who tend to deal with the smaller businesses, have clients who have moved abroad predominantly for tax reasons, and others that are thinking about doing it. And when you consider the statistics out there about the top 1%, 5%, 10%, and how much tax they actually pay, the impact of those changes on the behaviour of the wealthy, news channels are covering this regularly. It's not difficult to find the statistics, but it's a big missing chunk of tax that this Chancellor now has to find from elsewhere. Moving on to a couple of specific high-profile policies which have not yet been enacted, and thinking about whether we think they will come in as drafted. Let's turn first to the changes to inheritance tax for businesses and farms. Very controversial and well covered across all media channels. But just stripping it back a stage, what was actually announced last year for farms and trading businesses? What will change?
So what it is now is that if you pass on agricultural property or business property in life or on death, then it's covered by, in some cases 100%, some cases 50%, a relief, so against inheritance tax.
Yeah. And typically, behaviourally, farmers would not gift their farm away in lifetime. They would pass it on in their will.
Yeah.
No inheritance tax.
That's
the
right.
next generation carry on trading, earning their living from that farm. So how's that changing?
Well, what's going to happen now is, from April 26, is that an individual will have a £1 million allowance at 100%, and then all the remaining assets that they have that are business assets or agricultural assets will then only get relief at 50%. So where a lot of people were looking at 100% relief on multi-million estates are now looking at only at 100% on £1 million, and then their effective inheritance tax rate, it will be 20% on the remainder.
Okay, yeah.
Which is the 40%
yeah.
inheritance tax at 50%.
The 50% discount of 40% is 20%. Yeah, I get that. And actually, when you look at the value of a farm, shall we say, so a £5 million farm, for example, when you look at actually how much income and profit that generates for the farming family, it's not significant. But £5 million, what you're saying is the first million is covered. The next 4 million is charged at 20% at that stage. So, a bill of £800,000 in tax needs to be found from somewhere. Quite often, a £5 million farm is not going to be generating anything like the excess cash to fund that level of inheritance tax bill. So ultimately, I guess we'll see land being sold off, won't we?
Yeah, I can see no other way. I mean, will be given 10 years to pay inheritance tax without interest, but still, that in this scenario we've just created, that's £80,000 a year. The profits are unlikely to be anywhere near that, and the family still needs to, live in the time in between.
So I've seen some suggestions, and obviously a lot of pressure to consider revising this. And one proposal that I saw that sort of appealed to me and the clients that we advise is ultimately to increase that £1 million and maybe bring in a non 50% relief band at the top. If the objective of this policy is to target very wealthy landowners who have got into farming in order to shelter their wealth from inheritance tax, then one suggestion was to increase the £1 million threshold, maybe then have a 20% band and then a 40% band. So those with the most get caught by a higher charge and those at the bottom do pay less. How likely do you think that there will be some modification to these?
I can't see it happening.
Okay.
I think that Personally, I think the government have suffered the protests, and I think they'll stay entrenched. They had to backtrack on some other things, and I think that this one is that they'll just carry on with it. I mean, when I look at it, I think, well, yes, if you want to do that, we're talking about large investors and things. Why not set it at 500 acres or 1,000 acres? And then we don't have to worry about inflation. We know that this is a good unit that a family can live on, 500 acres or 1,000 acres comfortably, but without being extravagant.
Yeah, of course. I think it's sensible, but I guess we'll see, won't we? And I will certainly, my earlier podcast with Ryan Lincoln, we explored this in more detail, and we will get together again post-budget to see if anything has changed. Fingers crossed for the agricultural sector out there. And also, I think the point that is missed quite often is that this affects normal trading business and not just farms. Business property relief is a concept that's very commonly utilised when it comes to succession planning for many of the family businesses that I advise. And the concept of gifting those shares to the next generation, if you're fortunate enough to have adult children that are working in your family business, was never always the right thing to do. And passing on in the will was, in some scenarios, the optimum way for inheritance tax planning. That's all changed. So anybody out there that has a trading business and is fortunate enough to have family coming through to take over, you really do need to think about this, because this policy is heading your way too. The other sort of major policy that was announced last year and has not yet been enacted is again an inheritance tax related policy around pensions, and this isn't due to come in until 2027, but again likely to have major impact, isn't it?
I think so. I've known that one independent financial advisor say, well, they'll never be able to do this because pension law is so old. I mean, 1921, I think, when income tax relief came in, 1925 when the Trustees Act, which binds the pension trusts. But there is no law in this country which cannot be changed by another law. So I don't see why that should, just because it's been around a long time, why it shouldn't be reversed. And why a pension therefore couldn't come back into a person's estate for a calculation of inheritance tax. Yeah,
indeed. And I think where you've got a government with a large majority that generally think in that direction en bloc, then they can get this kind of policy through. And obviously we saw that with the finance bill that has now been voted in. It's just this policy has been given some time to be implemented. And what it actually means is that any unspent, undrawn down pension pots on death will be taxed at 40% from the 6th of April 2027. And on this one, I think, I feel quite strongly, as I know you do, Sophie, on the farming tax, but on this one I can see it from both both angles in that pensions primarily are saving for your own retirement. The best way to plan for retirement is to make sure you have enough money, don't run out, but don't leave too much behind. And I think with this relief in the past, maybe some people were utilising this exemption to pass wealth on to the children and beneficiaries free from tax. Whether or not income that's already been earned and tax paid should be taxed again on death is, I think, a separate debate around inheritance tax. Is it a worthwhile tax? And is it in accordance with our values and culture? But I think with regard to this, I think that there is an argument that many other assets are taxed on death under inheritance tax. Why were pensions exempt? And so I think the action point here really is to speak to your own IFA if you have them, and talk about your pension pot, certainly if you think you're not going to fully utilise or draw that down over the course of your lifetime, and hope to leave some behind, because if you die over the age of 75 as well, there's a double tax hit there. There's the 40%, or there will be the 40% tax charge on death, and then there's another income tax charge on your beneficiaries drawing that money out. And so the ultimate tax percentage is a scary amount depending upon circumstances. So I think, so I guess we're agreeing that we think this is unlikely to be reversed in this budget. There's still another year and a half to go. Plenty of pressure from the industry, but I think we're all preparing for this to be implemented in 2027, aren't we?
Yes, and in fact they're wondering, or some people are wondering, whether it might go further. At the moment you can draw out 25% of your pension pot tax-free.
Yep.
And because of the hype around this area, in a normal year, we might expect £40 billion to be withdrawn from pensions. But in 2024-25, there was actually £70 billion that came out of pensions in that time.
Yeah, certainly I'm speaking to clients, right now, this very week, about pulling their 25% tax-free lump sum out. And that may well not be the right option for everybody. It's likely there'll be some transitional rules for those that are over the retirement age. But where a government is desperate to raise money, as you say, capital gains tax was changed on budget day last year. So so there is some food for thought there, and certainly people need to just be aware of their own circumstances and speak to their advisors if they're concerned. So that kind of covers the main policies that have already been announced but not yet implemented. So let's move on to talking about some of the speculation. And I've been very conscious over the summer of, it doesn't seem like a day goes by or a Sunday paper doesn't go by without another wacky suggestion of increased taxes on various groups of people. And obviously not all of these are going to come to fruition. But I think as we near budget date, we're starting to see certain policies gathering a bit more pace, a bit more exposure. So let's explore some of those. And should we start by talking a little bit more about inheritance tax, which does seem to be an area of target by the Chancellor. Where do you think she may take things further on this area?
Yes, I think she will. I mean, if I can just sort of take a step back first, the 26th of November is the latest date that an autumn budget has ever been since the cycle began in 2017. And I can think of two reasons for that. One is that the Chancellor's hoping for a miraculous uptick in the economy, so she can fuel a load of spending plans and things. Or there's a lot of work needed to be done to make the legislation happen and the process work. Yeah. I think a lot of people just think she just stands up, she's written it the week before, she stands up and delivers it. That's not what happens. Behind the scenes, HMRC writes a whole raft of, they call them tax information and impact notes. So basically it's to put the words that she's saying in her speech into what does it actually mean in practice, and they have to look at the impacts as well, as part of the legislation of all of this, as to what's it going to do to the family, what's it going to do to the business and minority groups and whatnot. Yeah. And I think that the reason it's so late is that there's some major rewrites happening. And so that sort of frames what I'm going to say now, really. You might think, this is far out there and there's no way that anyone would do this, but I think so. I mean, we go back to June 2024, got the flyers through the door. There's a big one that landed on my doormat and it said change in great big red letters. I don't remember seeing any kind of actual policy in that, so I don't know what change we were voting for. Yeah. But we can look what we know. So, key left-wing philosophy is that it is inherently unfair that a person would be born into privilege, whereas another wouldn't. And so if we start to frame that, well, what does that mean? That means that the state ought to take more priority over the family.
Okay.
And if we take another step, well, what's that going to do in terms of tax policy? Well, and this is what my prediction is that I think there'll be a transfer tax or a gift tax or a in-life inheritance tax, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's going to be the next step for us. That at the moment, a person, an individual can give millions of pounds in life to their children or anyone else for that matter, survive 7 years, no inheritance tax.
Yeah.
And that's what's called a potentially exempt transfer, a PET. And I think the budget will be the death to the PET.
You do? Okay. So not just extending that 7 years to 8, 9, 10, but actually something more significant.
Yeah. Yes, you do hear that. People say, I'm sure it's going to extend that to 10 years from 7 years. But I think it doesn't take a whole month, even for HMRC, to change a 7 into a 10.
So that feels absolutely significant and major, and something that everybody will need to consider, certainly if they've got some wealth. The other area on inheritance taxes is of course, the nil rate band, the amount at the moment that you can pass on death without inheritance tax. And there's a residence nil rate band as well, isn't there? So when combined for a couple, I think this takes the entire relief up to £1 million. £1 million is a magic number, is it?
I think so.
To be mentioned by the Chancellor a lot. That's how much we need.
I think it's £1 million, yes. Yeah. So the £325,000 nil rate band has been frozen since 2009, I think. If we applied CPI inflation to that, we would be looking at, I think, £523,000 now. But I do wonder if, as part of it, of a change like I've just talked about, were to come into place, whether to soften that for more voters, that they might increase that nil rate band to £1 million each, just as you say, magic number, sufficient for anyone, £1 million.
Yeah. And of course, we talk quite a bit about sort of fiscal drag when it comes to income tax, but inflation when it comes to house prices means that more and more people are caught by inheritance tax in ways they'd never envisaged maybe 10, 20 years ago. And so many people who never thought they would have to undertake inheritance tax planning have to do so now. But from what you're saying, if your prediction comes to fruition, there may not be a huge amount of planning you can do.
Yeah.
You get your allowance, and what you have in lifetime is what you pass on in death and pay tax on that. So we shall see. Another area where we seem to be seeing a little bit more press coverage in recent days and weeks is around further increases in national insurance. Now, the government promised in their pre-election manifesto not to increase income tax, national insurance and VAT. That was then reframed last year to say national insurance on working people, which allowed them to justify the increase in employers' national insurance. You can discount the tone in my voice as I explain this. Now we're looking at potentially further national insurance on certain types of businesses and investors that haven't had to think about this in so much detail and levels in the past. Where are we heading with this more national insurance?
Yeah, I can see it happening. I mean, national insurance all of the legislation is specifically around earnings rather than investment income. I read in the Telegraph the other day a nice little neat solution, which I thought, oh yes, this could work. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But that was that if they were to increase income tax, but reduce employees' national insurance by the same amount, overall that hallowed no increase for working people, tax and national insurance as a net position would have been, that promise would be kept.
Yeah.
But then what that would mean is that those with rental income, pension income, interest income would all see an increase in their income tax.
Yeah, so the retired who are paying income tax now, state pension and private pensions will exceed personal allowances. That income tax increase would hit those people because they don't pay national insurance. So, that feels like shall we say, a relatively sensible consideration. But what we're reading is potentially not alongside that, but against that is maybe a policy where employers' national insurance, increased employees' national insurance is applied to rents, on landlords is applied to partnership profit shares when it comes to LLPs. Lots of these things talking about quite large percentages. When you base this around 15% of employers' national insurance rate, as you touched on earlier, suddenly asking landlords and business owners to find another 15% of national insurance to pay, these are big numbers. And I assume this comes back to the what's the policy of those with the broadest shoulders need to pay the most. Is you can justify most things with that, but ultimately what we're saying is 15% increased national insurance on landlords and partners in partnerships. It could be a big deal, couldn't it?
It could, and we've touched on it before when we've looked at employers' national insurance and what that's been doing to the jobs market. And we've looked at it when we looked at capital gains tax. We put that rate up. Actually, it meant less capital gains tax receipts for the government. People change behaviour. There's been quite a lot in the press about it recently. There's a chap called Laffer, the Laffer curve, and it's his idea that there's an optimum level of tax for a population, and you increase that rate and behaviours change.
Yeah, as we touched on earlier. So, we shall see. I don't think there's a huge amount that can be done pre-budget on those areas. Taking your money out of property in order to avoid national insurance on the rental income, or where you're going to put it into pensions, doesn't seem like the optimum route either. We've just touched on that, so we probably just need to debrief after the statement on these points. One final prediction you have is around sort of property taxes and council tax, and I know there's been mentioned about stamp duty in that as well. Where do you think there may be a change when it comes to council tax?
Well, I think that the local authorities perhaps struggling a little bit with adult social care in particular being very expensive and growing. And whilst they would perhaps have had subsidies from central government, so central government also struggling with funds, willing or able to give so much. And it seems to me that council tax change would be the obvious way to raise more funds. Whether we see a countrywide revaluation or a change in rates applied, I don't know. But I think something happening there. Yeah,
because I think there was talk about maybe linking council tax to stamp duty and people paying more on an asset basis than on a transactional basis to stimulate the housing market. Maybe there's some sense in that. The country needs to build more homes, and people need to move and downsize and upsize and buy the property that suits them. So maybe that'll all be linked together. But as you say, money running out at local level and national level. So that may be one way of allowing councils to raise more funds themselves. Okay, Sophie, I think plenty of thoughts there around what has been mooted and discussed and has been mentioned in the press so far, and we shall await with bated breath to see what is actually in the statement. Just to finish off, I thought it would be interesting just if you were the Chancellor and your remit was to have everyone part of a fairer society and use tax as a tool to do that. What are some of the things that you would look to put in place? What do you think the Chancellor should be thinking?
Well, I like this one. I had it from a local Norwich business owner. Just brilliant. Voluntary windfall tax.
Okay.
Voluntary windfall tax. You're thinking...
Yeah. Who's going to choose to pay tax? But yeah.
Is the idea that a lot of business owners are sitting on quite large reserves within their companies, millions of pounds, and they're waiting to that time when they eventually shut up shop, and they pay capital gains tax rate, which are lower than income tax if they were to pay the dividend as they went along. There's just the idea that, well, we're struggling for money now for the country. Why not do a temporary reduction, say for a year, of dividend tax rates? At the moment, higher rate is 33.75%. Additional rate is 39.35%. So why not reduce those to 15, 20, even 25%? And I think a lot of those business owners, those directors, they will be declaring dividends, and all that tax will come in 1 year for the government, and that would just be really useful.
Absolutely. Well, actually, when you set it out like that, it's sort of the behavioural aspect again, isn't it? And rather than pushing tax as hard as you can get away with and hoping behaviour won't change, let's embrace this and reduce those tax rates, get some cash in, and do some good things with it on a temporary basis. I could see some logic in that. I can't imagine for 1 second this even been considered, but it does seem a sensible proposition. Let's see. Also, you mentioned earlier when we were speaking around thresholds and cliff edges, and actually when you look at income tax in particular, there's some very strange levels at which we're all, as tax planning advisors, we're always advising our clients about this level, the tax jumps and then it drops, and there's these spikes and falls, and you think there could be some simplification built in around this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, we're just looking at inflationary rises on things. So 2019, we had a personal allowance of 12,500. Mm-hmm. It hasn't really moved since then. And I think if that had gone up with inflation, that would be now 16,000. Mm-hmm. Again, we're going back to, say, someone on national living wage, which is a full-time worker, is 24,000 a year, roughly. Mm-hmm. For them, if you put that personal allowance back up to where it would have been, mm-hmm. that's an extra £1,000 for them a year, which will make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And that's with increasing the personal allowance and also the national insurance nil rate percentage.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I understand. And also, obviously, there's these various cliff edges around £100,000 worth of earnings where the personal allowance is withdrawn, which again, as the top rate of tax is 45% and potentially more national insurance to come, it just feels maybe if there is going to be significant overhaul, an opportunity to reset. There's obviously a lot of different chancellors' policies have gone into this, and it's if you were setting out a new tax policy right now, you probably wouldn't write it in the way that it's currently drafted. It's just kind of an amalgamation of various different budgets over the years, isn't it? So something a bit more sensible feels maybe there's an opportunity there.
And that loss of the personal allowance creates a 60% tax rate in that band. Yep. So anyone who can control their income tries to avoid it going over 100,000, mm-hmm. and maybe once in a few years they might blow right through the top. Yeah. And again, changing behaviours because of what's gone in. Whereas actually, if we had a smooth move from the 40% higher rate mm-hmm. tax to 45% additional, or even put that up to 47%, I think overall the government might see more money.
Mm. Yeah, indeed. And you also mentioned thoughts you had around the new rules for making tax digital, increased compliance obligations. What are you thinking around that?
I think it's very difficult, especially because it's being brought in for sole traders first mm-hmm. and private landlords. They might not necessarily have those systems in place. Whereas if it came in for larger corporates, I mean, they'll have a whole, already things will be digital for them. They'll have a whole office function full of people working towards that aim. But anecdotally, I have quite a few clients in their 60s and 70s who trade, mm-hmm. who are just looking at this and thinking, it's just not worth the bother. I'm going to stop now. Mm-hmm. And that's 5 or 10 years of tax receipts that this government could have had, but they've been put off by it. I think what I'd like to see, though, I think, it's the direction of travel, isn't it? We're going to end up very much more digital than we are now. But what I'd like to see is more incentives instead. So when the payrolls first went digital, for many years there were incentives, £200 here, mm-hmm. £100 there, 75 or whatever, were given to those that did it voluntarily to begin with, and it really allowed the system to bed in then, mm-hmm. and it was the people that wanted to do it, were proactive, that then got everything working, and then gradually it became mandatory. Yeah, indeed. I understand and appreciate that. Sophie, thank you for your time today. And before we wrap up, I guess I'd just like your personal thoughts on where you think tax policy generally should go. It feels like government seems to be pushing to tax as much as possible, and growth is falling. Do you think that's the way that we should be heading as a country, as an economy? Do you think we can tax our way into growth, or do you think there's mistakes being made here? Personally, yeah, I think I would agree with, I heard the JCB boss on the radio this morning, mm-hmm. and he was saying that the government can't tax its way out of this problem. They need to allow business to grow, and that's the way to do it. Mm-hmm. And we've just talked about it. It's been the theme through what we've said about put up CGT rates. Actually, you end up with less tax. Mm-hmm. Put up employers' national insurance, we end up with less employment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that we're reaching those critical points with all of these taxes that we're looking at, where we are at the optimum and above it. Mm. And it's getting to that. I hate to see it, my clients with their mindset that they are coming to me now starting to say it's not worth the bother. Mm. And that breaks my heart. And I think it's a real sad day for the UK. And I'd like to see just the government being a bit kinder to those that are the people that are, that are generating our wealth as a country, mm-hmm. and supporting all of us, employees, pensioners, everybody. It all comes from what their work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that they should be supported more.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I think in response to that, I would say from my point of view, I think, and I touched on this in a previous podcast, that I just think businesses need some certainty. I think there's an argument to be made that the trust has already gone. We were sat here just over 12 months ago after last year's October budget being told that the pain had been implemented, there was nothing more to come. This was a once in a Parliament budget. That appears to have not been the case, whatever the reasons to justify this upcoming budget are. The way that the government and the leaks and the press coverage over the summer have floated so many worrying policies for business and business leaders and owners, I just think is no way to run an economy. Is no way to get people to buy into your plan. We all want growth. We all want to succeed, and I think innovation and entrepreneurial spirit is being dented. People are leaving the country. People are closing down their businesses early. People are worried about how much tax they need to pay. I think this budget needs to be fair and to be seen to being fair for a reason. What is this government believing? What are they going to be spending this money on? If this is going to happen again, we need to be told. If this is as bad as it's going to get, then I think businesses do have the confidence and the resources to push ahead. But currently, everything's on hold. Business needs certainty, and this budget needs to draw a line under whatever the pain is that needs to be solved. We need to understand what the government's general policy is on growth, and we all need to start to work towards it as a team. Let's see if that happens or not. Thank you for your time today. Cheers. And thanks for listening, everybody. Join us again next time.